When you think about World War II, it's the most devastating conflict in human history. It left cities in ruins, redrew the map of the entire world. But it didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't one single thing. It was more like a chain reaction, a series of dominoes just falling one after another. So today, let's follow that path. Let's see how those dominoes fell and how the world stumbled into its darkest hour.
Yeah, and that quote, it really nails it. We're not looking for one simple cause here. We're looking at a whole cascade of failures, of ambitions, of deep-seated resentments that just built on top of each other until a massive war felt almost unavoidable. With each event just knocking over the next one.
So where do we even begin? Well, believe it or not, it starts with the end of the last big one, World War I. We're going back to 1919 with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, a so-called peace treaty that, ironically, ended up planting the seeds for an even bigger, even deadlier war.
So, right at the core of this treaty was this one part, Article 231. People called it the War Guilt Clause. And it did exactly what it sounds like. It forced Germany to accept 100% of the blame for starting World War I. And you really have to get this. For the German people, this wasn't just some line in a document. It was a deep, deep national humiliation.
And of course, with that guilt came a massive bill. We're talking $33 billion in reparations. Now, to give you an idea of what that means, in today's money, that's over $270 billion. I mean, it's just an absolutely crushing amount of money. And get this, Germany was paying this off for so long, they only made the final payment in 2010, almost a century later. Imagine that weight, just pressing down on a whole country.
So, what happens when you have a debt that big? The government just started printing more and more money trying to pay it off, and the result? Catastrophic hyperinflation. The German mark basically became worthless paper. I mean, just look at these numbers. They're insane. In 1922, a loaf of bread was, say, 160 marks. Okay, 1 year later, that same loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People's life savings? Poof, gone overnight. The economy was in total freefall.
So, you've got this nation. It's humiliated, it's broke, people are desperate. And that kind of environment, it's the perfect breeding ground for extremism. And right into the middle of all this chaos steps Adolf Hitler. He was a really powerful speaker, and he had a simple message. I will restore our pride, I will tear up that treaty, and here's who we're going to blame for all our problems.
This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow burn. For about 10 years, Hitler just methodically used the worsening situation to his advantage. He became a master of propaganda, pointing the finger and creating scapegoats, blaming Jewish people, blaming socialists. And as the Great Depression hit and made things even worse, with millions out of work, his message really started to land. Until finally, in 1933, he grabbed total power.
Okay, so now Hitler has absolute power in Germany. What's the first thing he does? He starts testing the limits, pushing the boundaries on the world stage. He basically wanted to see how much he could get away with before anyone tried to stop him. And for a while, the answer was a lot. The world just watched.
So he started by just openly tearing up the rules of the Treaty of Versailles, just completely ignoring them, piece by piece. First up, he brings back the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, totally illegal according to the treaty. Then, he actually gets Britain to sign a deal that makes his new navy legitimate. Can you believe that? So by the time he just marches his troops right into Austria in 1938 and makes it part of Germany, well, it was obvious the treaty was dead.
This all leads to one of the most infamous moments of this whole period, the Munich Agreement. Hitler's next target was a part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. Now, to try and avoid a war, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, basically just gave it to him. He flies home, waving this piece of paper, telling everyone he's secured peace for our time. This whole strategy, it was called appeasement.
But that peace he talked about? It was a total illusion. Less than a year later, Hitler just goes ahead and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. This proved, without a doubt, that appeasement was a catastrophic failure. It showed that giving a bully what he wants doesn't satisfy him, it just makes him want more. The message was clear. Hitler couldn't be trusted.
Right, so, after Czechoslovakia, Hitler's eyes turned to his next target, Poland. And this was going to be the final domino, the one move that would finally force the world's hand. But before he moved on Poland, Hitler made one of the most shocking and frankly cynical moves imaginable. He was a hardcore anti-communist, right? Hated them. But he goes and signs a non-aggression pact with his arch-enemy, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. It was purely a power play to make sure he didn't have to fight a war on two fronts at once. And here's the kicker. They secretly agreed to split Poland between them.
So with his back covered in the east, Hitler gives the green light, September 1st, 1939. 1 million German soldiers pour across the border into Poland. This was it. The trigger had been pulled. And just like that, the policy of appeasement was dead and buried. Britain and France, they laid down the law. They gave Hitler an ultimatum. Get out of Poland now or it's war. He didn't listen. He just ignored them. And with that, the last domino fell. World War II had officially begun.
So the war is on. But the question is, how did Germany conquer so much territory so incredibly fast? Well, they weren't fighting like it was the last war, stuck in trenches. No, they had a brand new revolutionary strategy, a strategy that just completely shocked their opponents. It was called Blitzkrieg. In German, that means lightning war, and the name says it all. The whole point was to avoid the stalemate of trench warfare. Instead, you hit the enemy with so much speed and so much force, you create psychological shock. They don't even know what's happening until it's too late.
So how did it work? It was basically a three-step punch. First, you attack fast, and you attack where they least expect it. Then, you send in the heavy hitters, the Panzer tank divisions, to just blast a hole right through the enemy lines. And right behind them comes the Air Force, the Luftwaffe, attacking from above. It was just a brutal, overwhelming, and terrifyingly effective combo.
But there was another secret to the Blitzkrieg, a much darker one. German soldiers were being handed out millions of pills, a drug called Pervitin. You know what we call Pervitin today? Crystal meth. That's right. It let them fight for days on end. No sleep, no need for food. While the Allied soldiers were resting at night, the German war machine was literally high, and it just kept going.
And the results of this strategy? They were just breathtaking, almost unbelievable. In the spring of 1940, it was like a tidal wave. Country after country just fell. In April, Denmark and Norway. In May, it was Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. And by June, even France, with its huge army, had been defeated. Paris had fallen. France surrendered.
Now, the fall of France created this unbelievably desperate situation. You had almost 400,000 Allied soldiers completely trapped on the beaches at a place called Dunkirk. But then this incredible thing happened. A massive evacuation, with everything from naval destroyers to tiny fishing boats, managed to rescue about 350,000 of them. It was an absolute miracle for sure. It saved the British Army from being wiped out. But let's be clear, it was also a massive, catastrophic defeat. And that left the world on an absolute cliffhanger. Think about it. By the summer of 1940, Hitler had conquered almost all of Europe. The Soviet Union was technically on his side for now, and America? They wanted nothing to do with it. They were staying neutral. So it all came down to one terrifying question. With the Nazi war machine at its doorstep and standing completely alone, how in the world could Britain possibly survive?